Hello everyone, thank you for taking out time and joining me for today's session. Today's session is the third session in our webinar series, the hands-on lab for Windows Virtual Desktop. My name is Roshan. I work as a solution architect with Ingram Micro Australia. I'm based in Melbourne. My email address is firstname.last, which is roshan.yelaburgi@ingrammicro.com. In today's session, we will be talking about how you can go ahead and perform application publishing in Windows Virtual Desktop infrastructure. We'll look at dynamic scaling options, which is load balancing and scaling automation in Windows Virtual Desktop. As part of the agenda, we'll first quickly look at what is Windows Virtual Desktop, which customers are eligible to use Windows Virtual Desktop. Then we'll deep dive into what is application publishing, what are its prerequisites. We'll have a quick overview of a web management tool that Microsoft has introduced in the month of March 2019. So we'll have a look at that. Then we'll look at a demonstration of both the web management tool and how you can use this tool to perform application publishing. Post that, we look at the dynamic scaling options. The first one is load balancing options in Windows Virtual Desktop and scaling options and scenarios that are available with Windows Virtual Desktop. At the end, we'll end with a special promotion that Ingram Micro Australia is running for Windows Virtual Desktop and how you can get more information about this promotion and pricing of Windows Virtual Desktop. Let's get started. Windows Virtual Desktop is a desktop as a service offering from Microsoft. This is the only supported Windows 10 multi-session offering available in the market. It is very well optimized with Office Pro Plus, which means it works very well with Outlook, OneDrive, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, OneNote, all these various Office apps. It uses FS Logic technology in the backend, where it actually separates out the user profile data into a container, and this container is stored separately onto a shared location. Now, this shared location can be a file server running on a virtual machine, or it can be an Azure file storage. So it identifies what is the user data, the user profile data, and instead of dumping the data onto the C drive of the session host, it pulls out the data and separately stores it. And whenever the user logs in, this container is attached to the session host onto whichever he logs in. So for an end user, it's a very seamless experience, and hence it is very well optimized with Office Pro Plus. Windows 7 has officially stopped receiving security updates and patches from January 14th, 2020. Now, if you do have a customer who would want to continue to use Windows 7 and want to receive the updates and patches from Microsoft, then he has to deploy Windows 7 on Windows Virtual Desktop. That is the only supported mechanism for him to get security updates and patches. Windows Virtual Desktop, or WVD, is very much integrated with Microsoft 365. You can, in the next slide, you'll see how you can reuse the Windows 10 license, but you can also enable advanced security features like conditional access, multi-factor authentication, auditing, premium identity management. You can use all these various security features which are available as part of Microsoft 365 with Windows Virtual Desktop. You can create both pooled or personal, in other words, shared or dedicated desktops on WVD. And as we have seen in the first two sessions, deployment of Windows Virtual Desktop is not very complicated. It is simple, easy. It provides most of the options from Microsoft itself. You don't need a third-party tool to do this. The customers who are eligible for Windows Virtual Desktop. Now, if you have a customer who's using any of these Microsoft 365 plans mentioned here, then he can potentially reuse his Windows 10 license with Windows Virtual Desktop. So a customer who's part of, let's say, Microsoft 365 business plan, all he needs to pay in terms of WVD is the consumption of Azure. Now, if you have a customer who's not using any of these plans, who uses a different plan, now he will have to first purchase the Windows 10 subscription license, and when he deploys WVD, he'll have to pay for the Azure consumption. So he has two cost components, whereas the customer who's using any of these M365 plans, he can start straight away using WVD and reuse his M365 license. Now, if you do have a customer who wants to deploy a server operating system instead of a Windows 10 multi-session on WVD, then such a customer requires an IDSCAL with software assurance. What are the WVD requirements? You need to have an active Azure subscription in which you're able to create resources like a virtual network, virtual machines. You definitely need an Active Directory infrastructure. Windows Virtual Desktop cannot run without an Active Directory infrastructure, and we have two options for it. Either you can have a traditional Active Directory running on a Windows VM, or you can use Active Directory domain services. Now, if you're using Active Directory domain services, the user has to be part of this special group called AEDDC Administrators Group. The same user, whether you're using domain services or you're using Active Directory in a VM, he has to be a global administrator. Now, the same user can also be the contributor. He doesn't specifically need to be owner of the subscription, but owner or contributor permission would work. Once you have given the consent for the subscription to use Windows Virtual Desktop, an enterprise application gets created, and the user who's installing and configuring Windows Virtual Desktop needs to have tenant creator permission on this particular application. And at the end, this account, the account which you're using to configure WVD, cannot have multi-factor authentication enabled for it. Now, what are the requirements for application publishing? Now, in the first two sessions, we have gone through detailed how you can deploy host pool, how you can deploy session host, how you can use Active Directory, Azure Active Directory, and how you can use FS Logic to either store the data on Azure file storage or a VM acting as a file server. So I'll not go through all the steps in very much detail, but what I want to point out is it's the same steps. The way you deploy a desktop-based host pool, it's the same steps that you use to deploy an application publishing host pool as well. Now, do remember, a single host pool cannot provide you both desktop publishing and application publishing. You need to have separate host pool giving you two separate activities. For example, host pool A giving you desktop publishing and host pool B giving you application publishing. Now, the applications which are installed and which are available as part of your start menu can be used while publishing, or you can go ahead and directly publish these apps for users to use. If the applications are custom applications and they do not necessarily have binaries that write into the start menu, then you can also deploy custom apps based on the file locations as well. More about these publishing, we'll definitely have a closer look at these when we jump to the demonstration. Before I move to the demonstration, I want to quickly introduce this web management tool. Now, this web management tool, the code for this web management tool is available in the Microsoft WVD official GitHub site. The reason I wanted to introduce this tool is we have already seen the options of how you can create and manage and monitor within Azure portal. This tool simplifies how you can deploy host pool, how you can manage, how you can add users into the host pool. Instead of using PowerShell, you can use this tool to actually go ahead and perform a lot of activities, your day-to-day activities that you normally would do using PowerShell. Now, do remember that Microsoft is already working on introducing most of the management options and tools within the Azure portal itself. This is already in private preview. Hopefully, it should be available in the next 3 to 6 months. But till then, we can definitely use this web management tool to make your day-to-day operations a little more smoother and easier. Let's quickly look at how we can deploy this management tool and look at how we can use this tool to do application publishing and load balancing. So let me quickly jump to my browser here. So I want to first share you this particular article, which is Deploy a Management Tool with ARM. And this particular article is actually the one that helps you deploy the WVD management tool. right? It has step-by-step details. This is the GitHub RDS template folder, which I was talking about. And once you come to this link and hit deploy to Azure, it actually goes ahead and deploys an app service and an app service plan, right? So it's very simple, very easy to deploy. I would strongly recommend to use this. In my subscription, if I show you, so as you can see, I have app service and an app service plan, right? So I've already deployed this particular tool, and this is how the user interface of the tool looks like. So I can manage my tenants, I can manage my session host, I can manage even, host pool and session host. I can even manage my application publishing groups. So I can do all these things within this. I have two tenants. Now for the sake of this particular demonstration, I'll be using the WVD S3 tenant. And under this, I have a host pool by name desktop. So it'll just take a time to refresh. Yeah, desktop. And under desktop, I have two session hosts. So as you can see, desktop 0 and desktop 1. These are my two session hosts. If I go to app group, let me delete this app group. I can recreate it once again. Okay, so it's that some published items are still here. Okay, let me quickly delete these, and I can show you the full process of how you can create an app group, how you can publish applications in them. As you can see, creation, deletion just makes it so easy using this particular management tool. So I'll go ahead and create a new app group. I'll give it a name saying application publishing group. I'll give it the same friendly name in the description. I'll go ahead and select remote app and I'll click save. So the application publishing group is created here. Now if I click on this, I can go ahead, see what are my apps from the start menu. I can even publish from a particular path. I can mention the icon, friendly name, all these are possible. I can even add users into this particular app group. So to begin with, let's go ahead and publish some apps from the start menu. So let me go ahead, publish, let's say Internet Explorer, Excel, OneDrive, Outlook, Paint, and let's Task Manager. Okay, and also WordPad. Go ahead and click on publish. Takes a couple of seconds, and app publishing begins. Okay, so the app's errored out. So the errored out, it's basically because multiple processes were involved in publishing them. So Outlook was not published. Let me go ahead and publish my Outlook once again. Go to Outlook. Publish. Okay. So now I have Outlook, Paint, Word. So all these are being published. Now, I also need to assign users. Right? By default, the users who already have access to the other host pool do not automatically get transferred to this host pool. Right? So I need to go ahead and create a new user. So I have user by name Steve. Now this user is part of my Azure Active Directory. Now, in my setup, this user is part of my Active Directory. I have an Active Directory synced, and that is synced to my Azure Active Directory. And the entire Windows Virtual Desktop is able to communicate with my Active Directory itself. So you need to have the user either synced from an on-prem Active Directory, or he should be part of an Active Directory, Azure Active Directory, which has domain services enabled in it. I'll add another user called David. Solution Club. Okay, so 2 users are added. So now let's actually jump on and see how the user experience is. So I'll launch the WVD client and let me log in as David at solution. Password. And ideally, you should be able to see all the apps which are published for him. Okay, so as you can see, all the apps are available here. So if I launch WordPad, it goes ahead, speaks to the backend session host, asks me to log in, and if everything is right, WordPad should launch. So if I can also see, I go to the details, as you can see in the back end, the user is getting logged on to the machine and the WordPad is now open, right? So I can say this is David, test word. So I can basically create on the Word document that I normally do in my WordPad, and I should be able to go ahead and save this. So for now, I click exit, go and save, and I sign out from here. So this is how application publishing works, right? So you can publish any of your applications which is installed as part of a start menu or from a custom location and have users access this. Let's jump back to our slides. Now before that, if you want to make any changes, if you want to remove an app, let's say for example Paint, you can select, hit remove app and click yes. So the app gets removed. So it's very simple, very easy to manage, and it just makes your day-to-day activities much more simple and easier. Right? So let me jump back to the slides now. Okay, so the next is Windows Virtual Desktop load balancing option. So we have 2 types of load balancing options within Windows Virtual Desktop: breadth first and depth first. So let's look at breadth first. Breadth first is basically a scenario where before assigning a session host to your user request, it first checks which session host has the least number of user connections, right? So if it's a fresh setup and you have 2 session hosts, then the first session will be sent to session host 1, the second one will be sent to session host 2, the third will be sent to session host 1. So it basically checks which of your session host has the least number of sessions within it, and then sends the connection to it. So that is breadth first. So it checks all the session hosts, and then the new incoming request is sent to the session host which has the least number of sessions with them. In the depth first strategy, it's slightly different. So in depth first, what it does is it sends all the incoming requests to a particular session host till the maximum user session limit is hit, right? So I will show you the location where you can configure the maximum user session limit. So till that session limit has been hit or is reached, WVD will keep sending the user request to that particular session host. Only once it is reached, it will send it to the next one. Okay, so these are the 2 broad load balancing options available. Now, if you keep in mind cost saving, then depth first is more, I would say, cost effective, And you can actually combine the depth first strategy with Azure or WVD auto scaling mechanism, where as soon as the session host hits his max limit, then you start the new session host too, and then start allocating to it. If you do not have auto scaling enabled, then both the session hosts have to be up and running, right? It does not automatically start the second host too with just load balancing. So let me repeat, with just load balancing, you need to have both the session hosts up and running. If you're looking for a scenario where only when there is a need, you want to bring up the second session host and send the user request onto that second session host, you need to configure dynamic scaling, which is the third part of today's session. I'll show you that. So let's have a quick demonstration on where and how do you configure load balancing, and let's test out both the breadth and the depth approach. So I'll go back to my management tool, close a few tabs here. Okay, so it's the same session host that we see, desktop 0, desktop 1. Now here, if I go to the app group, desktop application, I have about 4 to 5 users. I have Dhoni, Kohli, Manish, Rahul, and Ravindra. So I have about 5 users. Now, where do you configure breadth and depth? Now, by default, whenever you create a host pool, the property of load balancing is always breadth, right? This is the default option. So if it is breadth, the maximum session limit is also 99,999. This is the default setting. Now, what I want to do is I want to change this to 2, which means I want to make sure that when 3 or 4 user logs in, they are spread across my 2 session hosts, right? In the next, after the breadth, when we switch to depth, you'll see that all these session user requests are going just to 1 session host till it reaches the maximum limit, and then it goes to the second one. Okay. Now in my scenario, again, both of them, let me quickly save this. Both the hosts, the session hosts, are up and running. Let this get saved. I'll quickly show you my session hosts as well. Okay. If I go back here, and if I go back to my virtual machines, filter it by, as you can see, both of these 2 are up and running, right? So with just load balancing, it has to be up and running. You cannot have one shut down and one started. So going back, let me go to the host and let me just recheck if, okay, the max session limit is 2 and it's breadth. Okay. So now let's log in with some users. Let me make sure that there are no user sessions currently. Okay. Okay, so there are no user sessions. So let me log in here. Log in as at solution.club. Okay, so 1 user is logged in. Okay, let me open another RDP machine. And I log in as another user. Let's make this look like this. Okay, and here, let me sign out. and sign in as Kohli here. Just maximize this. Okay, so Kohli is logged in. I'm using the web browser this time. And I'll click allow. So ideally, both Dhoni and Kohli should be logged on to the same session host in the backend. I'm sorry, two different session hosts in the backend, right? Because it's a breadth first. Okay, so he's logged into. Minimize this. Nice. Let's refresh. And if I select desktop 1, you can see Kohli is logged into desktop 1. If I go to desktop 0, and see Dhoni is logged into the desktop 0, right? If I log in as a third user, and let me log in as a third user, then it'll again send back to one of them. It'll not, it'll go ahead and keep distributing it. So, oops, just a second, let me log in again. This is the third user, it's Rahul. Okay, he's logged into. Let's just refresh. I'm sorry, refresh. As you can see, now Rahul is logged in to the first one again, to session desktop 0. Go to desktop 1, it's only Kohli who's logged in there, right? So this is how the breadth approach works. So it distributes, it checks which is the least available resources. So if the fourth user logs in, it'll actually send it to desktop 1, right? So that is how the breadth first approach works. So let me sign off all these users so that I can reuse the users for my depth. Log off. So I'm forcing the users to sign out. Okay. Just try to sign out here as well. Okay, wonderful. So now just refresh. The users should be logged off. Yeah, so my desktop 0 has no user sessions and my desktop 1 has no user sessions. So next what I'll do to show the demonstration of depth, I'll go ahead and change this to depth. I'll keep it as 2. So now what should happen is the first 2 users, or let me change it to 3, so it is easier to understand. So all the first 3 users who log in all of them should go into the same session host in the backend. The fourth user should go into a different session host altogether, right? So let me click update. Okay, so the host pool is updated. So let us see just to recheck that there are no users. Okay, so let me log in here. So let's see which session host does Dhoni log into. And it'll be the same session host that is used by the next two users as well. Okay, so Dhoni is logged into desktop 1. Now if I go here, so I'm logged in as Kohli here. Logged in. Okay, so I hit to refresh. See, Kohli is also here. If I go to the first one, you'll see no user sessions. Right, there are no user sessions here. All the user sessions are currently in desktop 1. Now let me log in as a third user as well. This is the third user logging in. Okay, so I was also logged in. Okay, refresh. Yeah, as you can see, all the three users are going into the same one. Right, if I go to session host 0, desktop 0, no user sessions. So this is how you can go ahead and configure depth first and breadth first and distribute the incoming user request. Okay, so we go back to the slides and let's look into dynamic scaling. So WVD provides three types or three scenarios when it comes to dynamic scaling, right? So you can schedule VMs to start and stop, or you can schedule session hosts to start and stop based on peak and off-peak business hours. So in your scenario, if you say that you have 3 session hosts as part of your scenario, and your work time is 8 o'clock in the morning to 6 in the evening. So during the work hours, during your peak hours from 8 to 6, you want all the 3 session hosts to be up and running. But after 6 o'clock till morning 8 o'clock, you just want 1 session host to be running, right? So that is one of the automation. scale out VMs based on number of sessions per core. Now, as you just saw, we can set the maximum session limit that's with respect to load balancing. When it comes to auto scaling, there's a different parameter where you can set the number of sessions per core. Now, let's say if your session host is 2 core or 4 core or 6 core, you can say each core can accommodate 1, 2, 3, 4 or any number of users. Right? Now, in my scenario, I have 2 session hosts. Each session host is made of 2 core and 16 GB RAM. So what I will do is I'll also show you that particular option. I have set the maximum number of sessions per core is equal to 2. So each session host can accommodate 4 user connections. As soon as I hit the 4 user connections, automatically a second session host will begin so that it can accommodate the 5th user. So this type of scaling is known as scale out VMs based on number of sessions per core. That's the second one. The last one is scale in, right? So as I explained, the first one was scale out during peak off and on hours. The third one is scale in. So after 6 o'clock in the evening, you definitely want to scale in or reduce down the number of servers. So these are the 3 scenarios that you can implement using Azure Automation. Now, for this to work, there are certain prerequisites, right? So you need to have, of course, you need to have Windows Virtual Desktop tenant and session host created. You definitely need more than 1 session host because with just one, there's no point of auto scaling at all. And a user with contribute access to actually configure this entire auto scaling mechanism. Okay. Now let me jump to the demo here. Now, I'll not show the entire configuration of the auto scaling itself because it's quite a lengthy process. But what I'll do is I'll share you this particular link. I'll put it in the description and in the email. This is the article which you would use to actually go ahead and configure the session host using Azure Automation. Right? So in the backend, it is actually using Logic App, Azure Automation, webhooks, runbooks, all these things to go ahead and configure automation of your session host. So what it does is, these are the 3 scenarios which we just spoke about, right? So, and this is the parameter, session threshold per CPU, right? This is where you actually go ahead and set, I want 1 or 2 or 3. And there's another parameter called minimum number of RDSH. This is during off-peak hours, how many session hosts do you want to run? So these are the 2 parameters that we would be using, right? So if I scroll through the article, you see it first creates an Azure Automation account, and all the links, all the scripts, everything is available here. Unfortunately, the web management does not have the options to auto scale. You still have to use PowerShell commands to do this. So you first need to create an Azure Automation account. It'll actually pull out a script from the GitHub and store it on a local PC. It'll run the script. It'll actually go ahead and create the Azure Automation account. You'll need to give it run as account permissions. And then you go ahead, associate that with your, you actually go ahead and create a RDS contributor role, right? So you can see here, actually go ahead and create an RDS contributor role. You create the Azure Logic App and the execution schedule. So this is the lengthy, I can say, variables, the number of variables that you create. So let me actually jump onto my PowerShell and show you some of these variables. So the first one is session resource group name. So give you a user resource group name, tenant ID or the directory ID, subscription ID, tenant name, session host, recurring interval. So this basically says how frequently do you want the job to run, right? So it is in minutes. So I've given it 15 minutes. So every 15 minutes it keeps checking, do I have new user request? Is it above the threshold? Do I need to create a new session host? Do I need to start the new session host? Do I need to shut down the session or because it has reached off-peak hours? So every 15 minutes, now you can definitely reduce the time, right? Now, just for the sake of demo, I've kept my business hours quite long. So it's 1 o'clock in the morning to 11 in the night. But ideally, in your scenario, it will be, ideally, I hope it's 8 in the morning to 6 in the evening. So it's a 24-hour clock, right? The time difference. So this is where you put your time zone, a session threshold per CPU, right? So I've given 2. In my scenario, minimum number of RDSH is 1. So during my off-peak hours, which is after 6 o'clock, instead of 2 session hosts, it will shut down 1 and just run 1 session host. Now, before it shuts down, it gives the user 30 seconds to log off, right? And it displays these 2 messages. So it says scaling down, please log off. And in the description, it will say, we are scaling down resources now, please save your work and log off. Now you can definitely customize these messages, right? Now this is the location, the Azure region where it is running. This is my Azure Automation name, the account name, the webhook. Now this is given as the output of running the first PowerShell command when you create the Azure Automation. This is one of the outputs, the webhook URL, the Azure Automation account, and the maintenance tag is basically any VM with the tag VM, can be anything else in your scenario, will not, this particular script will not run against it. So in my environment, there's no VM called with the tag VM, at least in the resource group, so hence I've given that. And it basically goes ahead and runs this entire logic. Okay, so this is the script. Let me quickly give you an insight into my infrastructure. So now currently, as you can see, I have 2 session hosts which are part of my autoscale session host pool. So if I go here, just to refresh once, right? If I go to host, I have autoscale 0 and autoscale 1, right? Now each of them are configured using 2 core CPUs and 16 GB RAM, right? If I go to autoscale 1, it is also 2 core and 16 GB machine. So if you remember, the maximum session threshold per CPU I've given is 2, which means once I log in as 4 users, I should ideally see that my machine, which is currently in the shutdown stage, should automatically start so that it can cater to my 5th user, right? So that's the demo which I'll show you. I'll also show you the webhook. So this is the logic app, which is created as part of the script which I've run. If I click on edit, so I'm currently running my my logic app every 5 minutes instead of 15 minutes. Now you can always change. So when you create it and you want to change it later, you can change it to seconds, minutes, hours. So I put it to every 5 minutes. So every 5 minutes it keeps running, and it checks, do I need more? Do I need to reduce down? Check the number of users. So it keeps checking all these things. So for now, I'll not change it. And I show you the various components that actually get created. Let me quickly go to my resource group and group by type. So there are 3 things that get created as part of the article. One is your automation account. Second is your logic app. And third is your runbook, right? So runbook is the one where you can actually track your jobs. So these are the jobs which are currently running. And if I go to any of the job and go to output, you'll see all the details here, right? So I'll show you, I'll come back to these output and details when I'll start logging in and showing how the user requests are. So before I log in, let us see the latest run. Currently, it has run 2 minutes ago, so it's 9:20, so it's 9:18. It has run this particular command. It says it is in peak hours now. Now do remember, when I ran this, the peak hours which I mentioned was 1 o'clock in the morning to 11 in the night, and hence it says peak hours. Okay. It says checking the session host, the number of sessions are 3. Checking the session host on auto scale, and the number of sessions are 0, and status is unavailable, which means this machine is currently shut down. Current number of running session is 1, total number of user sessions 3, current available session capacity is 4, which means I can still have one user to log in, right? So let me log in as one of the user, and when it runs the next time, you will see that a new session host, the one that is shut down, actually gets launched. So let me actually see in which session. Ideally, this should have 0, right? Because this is currently in a shutdown stage, right? Session host 1, sorry, auto scale 1 is shut down, right? So let me reconfirm that to you. As you can see, auto scale 1 is shut down, stopped. So hence there are no user requests here. So if I go to auto scale 0, I should see 3 sessions, right? So Kohli, Manish, and Rahul, these are 3 sessions which are logged. Okay, so let me log in as the 4th one, which is, let's say I log in as Dhoni. Or let me do this. Let me just log off all these users because some of them are disconnected, some of them are active. Just to refresh. Okay. So as of now, it's only auto scale 0 which is running. And if I log in as 3 users, ideally all the 3 or all the 4 users should go to auto scale 0. And the 5th user should go to auto scale 1. And before the 5th user logs in, let's hope that the job runs and the 5th user is pushed to auto scale 1. And so let's start logging in. So this is the first user. It's the second user. Okay. We launch the 3rd user. Okay, so the 3rd user also logged in. Okay. So before we logged in as 4th user, I just want to check the job. Let's go back and check the job. Okay, it's run on 9/23. Let's see how many users was it able to find. So 9/23, 2 users were detected. So 9/23, so the next time it runs, it should ideally detect 3 users. Let me, in the meanwhile, quickly log in as the 4th user as well. Sorry. So that I can show you that the virtual machine actually starts. So now this is the 4th user. Okay. 4 users are logged in. I go go here and say refresh. Right, so 4 users are already logged in. Right, so now the job should run. Let's refresh. It's not yet started. So it start any second now. And if I show you the output, ideally, if everything is correct, it should actually show you the status saying the 4 users, capacity is met of the one server. I need to start the other server, and actually starts the server and makes it ready for the 5th user. So let's give it another minute. Okay, so the job is currently queuing. So if I go to the outputs, so you should see the details here. Okay, let me refresh. So it's now checking, starting the session host to see the status. It is in the P cards now. Okay, so it says checking current session host. This is 4, status unavailable. Checking the second host, it is 0, status unavailable. Current total number of users is 4. Current available capacity is 4. The current available capacity is less than the user demand. Starting session host, right? Which means it is actually starting the auto scale 1. I actually go back here and go to my virtual machines. I should ideally see, you see, it says starting, right? So this gets started and it should get up and running. If I go back to my job, it's still running. It's still waiting for the machine to complete. Let's give it a couple of seconds. And ideally, it should start the machine so that when the 5th user logs in, the 5th user actually goes on to that new session host. Okay. Yeah, the virtual machine is started, auto scale 1. So now it actually shows you the new capacity details. It should ideally see that now the user session capacity is 8. Right? So now the available capacity is 8. The session hosts, and the total number of hosts are 4, number of sessions are 2. Right? So this is how you can see that the automatic scaling happens within Windows Virtual Desktop. Let me go back to my slides. Okay. So there are a couple of things to note. One is the active user who is already connected, when the peak load is met, the user does not get disconnected. What does this mean is, now right now we saw that 4 users were logged in. We paused so that we want so that the 5th user can actually log into the session host. Now in a real world scenario, nobody actually waits, right? So users keep logging in, logging off. Now, even before the job ran, if there was a 5th or the 6th user logging in, he would by default be sent to the session host which is actually running, though the maximum user capacity is met, right? And when the second host pool gets created, the user does not automatically get transferred to it unless he logs off and logs in, right? That's one of the things to make note of. There's no way to automatically sign out an ideal user. So let's say at 5:30 in the evening, the user just logs his PC and goes, but doesn't log off from his Windows Virtual Desktop session. Is that session active? The answer is yes. Though he's not using, the answer is yes. It does not log off automatically. So in order to automatically sign off, which actually helps you in scaling up and scaling down resources, you have to use a group policy for it, right? Enable and set the group policy objects for both session host. For session host, you can check, is the session host active or idle? If it is idle, which means there are no concurrent user requests, so shut it down. And for user, is the user ID idle or active? So if it's idle, then again shut down the user or log off the user. So for these two things, you'll have to create group policy object. Details of the group policy object, I'll drop you an email and also put in the description of the video, and hopefully that will help you out in better scaling. But by default, the only three scenarios that are supported is scale out during peak, peak and off peak hours, scale out depending on the number of user session per core, and scale down during off peak hours. The three scenarios by default. If you want to take it to the next level, you have to implement group policies as of today. Hopefully in the future, Microsoft brings these two features also within the automation itself. For the promotion, if you are an Ingram Micro Australia partner and you have any Windows Virtual Desktop active opportunity, we can actually help you fund the implementation worth $1,000 of Azure credit, and we'll also help you implement it. Now, the implementation is only for a user or only for a customer with less than 25 users. If it is more than 25 users, then we'll have to scope out the work and we'll have to charge based on the number of mandates. But if you have a scenario where it is less than 25 users, the professional services cost will be free, and we'll also give you $1,000 Azure credit for it. This offer is only available for the first 20 users who come to us with an Azure active WVD opportunity. Please contact your cloud BDMs with the contact details and their email addresses. They are the right people who can assist you with qualifying the opportunity, getting the $1,000 credit, and the various processes involved. Well, that brings me to the end of today's session. Thank you very much for taking your time and joining me in today's call. Have a nice day ahead.